Hi, my name is John Witchel, and I'm the CEO of King Energy.
Hi, this is Bob McGinley. Thanks again for joining the Tech Leads. Today I have with me John Witchel, who's the CEO of King Energy. John, thanks for joining.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
So John, just to kick this off, let's tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of figure out how you got from where you were into King Energy and tell the story of where this all came from.
Sure, happy to. So I've been doing startups my whole life. This is my 10th startup. I did my first startup during the dot-com boom and got into Fintech in 2004 when I started a company called Prosper Marketplace with Chris Larson. Learned all about how to build great software for the financial industry and did some other things. And then eventually got into renewables in 2014 when a company of mine was acquired by Solar City, which was at the time the largest developer in the United States. We had about $3 billion in assets, about a $250,000 installation, mostly resi. And we were acquired to build the software platform that would ultimately run all the loan, lease, and PPAs of Solar City. So it's really there that I learned all about renewables and how the business works. And it was really just a great time, and it was an amazing company. And went and did some other stuff and then started King Energy in 2020.
Cool. So since this is a technical podcast, where did the software development background come from?
Sure. So I have been writing software my whole life. I was the lemonade stand kid growing up and, had an Apple II Plus when I was a little kid and just loved software and wrote a little bit of software in college. But didn't really get serious about software until I went back to get my graduate degree in the early 2000s and really started taking commercial software very seriously and have written quite a bit of software and designed quite a bit of software. But like all software in the world, great software is really built by teams. So I was just a part of a larger team, and some of those guys have come with me over the years. In fact, our Chief Technology Officer here at King Energy was my TA in college for CS 101. And we got to be great friends, and we've worked together on and off ever since.
That's great. Did you have a corporate software development job before you kind of get into the startup stuff, or were you always in that space?
No, I've been doing startups pretty much on and off ever since. Yeah, I've worked for some big companies over the years, but usually by way of acquisition. We build software that tends to create a lot of value, and people like the software, they want to buy it, and I generally come with, as is normal during most M&A work, that the lead designers and the lead programmers will come in with the software. So
great. And what was your language of choice?
Well, my first language, which will probably date me a little bit, was Java. I love Java. You learned object-oriented programming. It was a great language at the time. It's showing some age after all these years. I would say today most of the stuff that we write is in Python. We do a fair amount of TypeScript, and then all the wrappings that come with that.
And is it mostly web development now that you're doing, or?
Sure. So yes, in the sense that most fintech software is interfaced through a web interface, whether it's you're touching it on your phone or you're touching it through administrative interfaces, drop-down menus, configurations, all those things. You would consider it web interface, but that's actually not where the hard stuff is. The hard stuff is really down in the guts of the server-side software, where you're writing the software that has to keep track of all the financial information for a given asset. So if you really think about the solar industry, most people understand the solar industry as an engineering and a construction business, because that's what most people come in contact with. They'll see somebody installing software on the roof of their neighbor, or they'll see the construction being done out in the desert if they're driving across, throughout the Western United States. But there's this other side of the business, which is really all about how do you finance these multi-million-dollar systems, and that's the complicated. That is a very complicated part of the business, because these are long duration assets. You have to keep track of the money over decades. Now, to be honest, if you wanted to keep track of a couple of hundred buyers of your energy and maybe spread across 20 or 30 systems, you could do that with Excel. You could do that with a couple of accountants, maybe an analyst or two. But if you wanted to keep track of hundreds of thousands of off-takers or buyers of your energy across tens of thousands of utilities, or excuse me, tens of thousands of assets across dozens of utilities, where customers are constantly coming and going, and there's rolling balances and late fees and interest payments, and all the projects are financed by different partners who all have their own slightly different terms and conditions. There's only one way to do that, and that's really with enterprise software. And really the issue is a matter of scale. We like to say in our business, Fintech software is death by 1,000 cuts. If you want to write software that's the happy path in finance software or Fintech software, that's pretty easy. It's actually not very hard to say, well, this person owes me $100. Here's an invoice. I use Stripe to charge the $100. The charge went through, and then I got the money, and the money settled 2 days later. That's easy. Anybody can do that. Any college kid could write that software. But if you start thinking about late fees and courtesy charges and courtesy credits and amortization schedules and balance sheets and profit and loss and settlement issues and holdbacks and the little issues just keep piling up, and eventually what you end up with is very sophisticated software, and there's not a lot of people in the world who can write that kind of software.
Yeah, you didn't even mention state, local, and federal taxes, right? So it's the complexity there definitely scales rather quickly, doesn't it? So let's segue to King Energy, because I love this story and how you came up with the idea, and then let's talk about how you got started, what happened there. But yeah, walk us through it. Not being someone who travels quite frequently, more than I like. I'm a window seat guy, so I kind of really related to this. So tell me where you got the idea.
Sure. So I had left Solar City in 2017, shortly after the Tesla acquisition, and had went and done another piece of or another startup outside of the renewable space. Had a great exit with that, and was very pleased with the outcome of that software. But I really missed renewables. I really missed the industry. I love being on the right side of history. I love working on a global problem. I live here in Durango, Colorado, which is a small town on the western slope of Colorado, and I love the idea that I could build a company that had a global impact if I really put my mind to it. And so I was looking around for my next startup, knowing that I wanted to get back into the renewable space, and I was flying into LAX, and we just come over the hill, and we're coming on the glide path, and I looked out into the LA basin, and I was looking out the window, and I saw all these big, flat, white roofs all over the LA basin that didn't have solar on them. And I thought, I mean, that's really incredible. It's a pretty progressive part of the United States. They were in early into solar. Why are all of these rooftops, which are very easy to build on, not covered in solar? And that really began the discovery of King Energy. And I'm not the smartest guy to fly into LAX. I probably wasn't even the smartest guy on the plane. Probably not even the smartest guy on my row. And so I wasn't the first guy to look out the window and wonder that. And I found that free markets and capitalism, the question of why is something the way it is in the world, there's usually a reason. And the first question that you have to ask is, what is that reason? And the answer to the question of why hasn't anybody built solar on all these big flat roofs is because they're all multi-tenant buildings. They're multi-tenant commercial buildings. And if you double click on that and you look closely and say, okay, well, underneath that, what's the problem? And the problem is what's called the split incentive problem. And it's a well understood problem in the industry. And the split incentive goes like this. A landlord in a multi-tenant building has no incentive to build solar on the rooftop because he's just passing through the cost of energy. So he doesn't have a dog in the fight. And tenants don't want to invest to build solar on a building they don't own. So no one does. The truth is, everybody's known what the solution to that problem is forever. And the solution to the split incentive problem is third-party ownership. You need a third party to come in and manage both sides of the equation and coordinate everybody's needs. If you double click on that and you say, well, if everybody knows what the problem is and everybody knows what the solution is, why isn't anybody doing it? The answer is twofold. So problem number one is underwriting. How do you underwrite these systems? And the historical sources of capital for building large-scale solar systems really was looking for a single credit-worthy off-taker. They basically wanted to lend the money to Whole Foods, and then Whole Foods would sign a 20-year PPA, and they would be able to finance the system. You could build the system, and that was that. That doesn't work in a typical multi-tenant building where you have a noodle shop, a yoga studio, everybody's favorite pizzeria. That pizzeria may have been around for 20 years, but they don't have 3 years of audited financials. So nobody could finance these these buildings. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that even if you found somebody to build the systems and to finance these systems, all you did was buy yourself 20 years of heartburn and headache managing all these tenants coming and going and remitting invoices and sending payments here and there. And that was a problem I was uniquely well suited to solve. And my team was very experienced at dealing with this exact issue at scale. And from there, it was just figuring out the first part of the problem. How can we get these things financed? And once we cracked that nut, we were off to the races at King Energy.
Yeah, that's a great story. So just because not everyone's going to know all the terminology, tell me what a PPA is.
Sure. So a PPA stands for a power purchase agreement. There are three ways to finance a system if you're not going to pay for the system in cash. You can take a loan, which is pretty straightforward. Everybody knows what a loan is. You can lease it, and that works exactly like your car. You pay a monthly amount each month, and then at the end, maybe you buy out the system 20 years from now for $1. And both of those strategies have pros and cons. But the real problem with that is that the price of energy is constantly changing, and the amount of energy that a solar system is outputting changes seasonally, and so it's very hard to get the energy, the value of the energy, to line up with the payments so that it's always worth it. Yep. On a month-on-month basis. It's worth it over time, but month over month, you could actually lose money in the winter, quote unquote, lose money in the winter months with a loan, and you'll make it up in the summer months, but that doesn't feel great to most consumers. So the PPA was created, and the power purchase agreement basically said, look, you only pay for the energy that is generated by the system. And each month you read the meter off of the solar panel, and you say, okay, well, 100 kilowatt hours of energy was created from this system. that's worth X. You look it up on your PPA, and that's what you pay that month. And then over the year, you end up saving a lot of money because it's solar, and frankly, solar is just a very profitable business. You but that fluctuation is absorbed by either the finance partner or a company like King Energy. And from the consumer's point of view, it's just a better way to buy solar.
All right, so let's work through a scenario. So I want to have solar on my house, but I don't have 20 grand to go put panels up there and the converter and the meter and all of the other stuff. So I call you at King Energy and say, "Hey John, how can we make this work?" Right? And basically tell me how that's going to walk through at the 10,000 foot level.
Sure. So so King Energy specializes in multi-tenant C&I buildings. So if you called us to put something on your roof of your home, we would refer you to a local installer. But let's say you owned the local
Strip mall,
shopping center,
nails, yeah.
Yep. You had a nail
Mattress
salon
store.
in there, the noodle shop, maybe a grocery store in there, maybe a hardware store. It can be a pretty
Teriyaki.
big system. Yeah, could be a big system, could be a small store, but these are your everyday shopping centers.
Yeah.
Same problem, but with a bunch of extra zeros. Nobody wants to spend $1 million to put a bunch of solar up on the roof on day one. The landlord doesn't want to do it because they don't profit from that in any way, and the tenants don't want to do that because they may move to another facility, and then what happens to their investment in the solar? So neither of them do it. So King Energy sources that capital, and then we we install, own, and operate that system in its entirety. And our business plan or a go-to-market strategy is actually very simple. We call the landlord and we say, "Hey, we want to rent your roof." And they say, yeah, we've heard that before. Because all the 1.0 solar developers all went to all these landlords and they say, "Hey, we want to rent your roof." They say, "Oh, that sounds great." And they're like, "But we also want you to guarantee the income and we want you to buy the tax credits." And they're like, whoa, we're landlords. We're not in that business. You're in the energy business. We're in the renting space business. And so we solved all of that, and we came to the landlords and we said, "Listen, solar's a great business. We're just going to pay you a rental rate. That's it. It's a very simple lease. It's a 5-page lease. You don't have to guarantee anything. Don't worry about the tax credits. Those are our problem. All the incentives, that's all our problem. You don't get a revenue share for every cup of coffee that gets sold at Starbucks. We're not going to give you a revenue share of our business either." And they say, "That sounds great. We're in the business of renting space. Here's a bunch of, we're not making any money on our roof. Sign me up." Yeah. Then we turn around and we physically install a bunch of solar and batteries at our expense. We own all of those systems, and then we turn around and we go to the tenants and we say, "We will sell you the energy at 10% below the value of that energy if you would pull that energy off the grid." And they say, "Well, listen, I don't really know anything about energy. I don't really care. I know it's expensive. I don't like paying for all this electricity. But if you can save me money each month and there's no strings attached, I'll do it." Yeah. And that is exactly what we do. And so each month, when we deliver the energy to the tenants, their cost of energy is lower because a bunch of the energy is generated by the solar panels. How much lower will vary each month, and as the prices go up and down by the local utility. All of that is our problem. The only thing the tenant has to know is that each month, by using King Energy, their energy costs will be lower, period.
Yeah.
And it works great. The problem is that in like so many things in the world of software, easy is hard. It's really hard to make a really truly smooth, high quality experience for somebody in software. And so it's real easy for me to say 10% discount no matter what. It's very challenging to deliver that because you have so many moving parts and you have so many little nooks and crannies where the utilities are constantly playing with their pricing. Oh, we have summer peak, we have winter peak, we have seasonality, we have non-bypassable charges, taxes, reserves, fire mitigation charges. Like, keeping track of all of that is very challenging. And to do that across dozens of utilities there's only one way to do it, and it's with enterprise software. And that's a big part of the value that King Energy is able to deliver to our investors, as well as our tenants, as well as our landlords.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting an ulcer just thinking about how complex it is, right? So, but I'm just sitting here thinking about it. It's almost like you've become your own utility to a degree. Only now you're distributed, right? You're instead of generating your power at a giant plant where you're, feeding coal and natural gas and those types of things, you're building this, this network of solar locations, and now you're trying to manage it all. So you've got all the IoT pieces to that, right? So you can get all the billing stuff back to the software, and you're doing your own billing and invoicing and managing payments and all of that stuff as well, right? So I got to believe you're pretty much the same structure as a lot of utility companies.
Well, we couldn't be a utility because a utility is a regulated entity. But
it's the similar model, though, right? So
yeah, so we couldn't be a utility because the utility is a regulated industry that enjoys monopolistic power. And if we were declared a utility, we'd be in a very different business. However, to your point, we do offer a lot of the same value that a utility offers, in the sense that we are providing energy to consumers and managing all the services and billing and collections that a utility manages. But there are some important differences. One of the important differences is that we for a local shopping center, the energy is generated and delivered on site, right? We do not need to put our energy up on the big transmission lines that you see when you're driving down the highway. All of that infrastructure is owned and managed by your local and regional utilities, and that has real cost and real value, and that cost and value gets passed on to the consumers and the ratepayers. And in general, King Energy is not a part of that side of the infrastructure. That really is the utility's core competency. In the industry, it's called G&T, right? Generation and transmission. We are much more focused on lowering the cost of energy to the actual small businesses that run their stores every day, and creating value on site.
And do you put energy back on the grid as well?
We do. We try not to, because if you export, that's called exporting energy, and we export energy to the grid, and the grid has to absorb that, and they're required to buy it from us. But in general, and this is going to vary from different parts, from state to state and utility to utility, but in general, they'll buy it at the wholesale rate of energy, which is, depending on where you are in the country, as low as 10% of the retail rate.
Wow.
So if they're selling that energy at 50 cents retail for a kilowatt hour, they'll buy it from you at 5 cents. And so it's tough to build your business at 5 cents a kilowatt hour if they're just turning around and marking up the energy to 50 cents anyway. So we try to design our systems to minimize export. But it does happen. It tends to be inconsequential. For King Energy, there are other companies out there that are very focused on providing utility scale green energy. That's just not really where King Energy is focused in the industry.
Yeah, so then you've got some level of storage, I would imagine, right? So you got to a bank of batteries where you're able to kind of keep some of the power, and then you can slowly distribute it through the night and that kind of stuff.
That's right. And the batteries are a really interesting and fun technology to think about. But if you sort of push the technology aside and you think of it really as just this sort of black box, and you're like, and you say, okay, well, I got to spend a lot of money to buy this machine or this battery or this box or this cube, and I'm just going to physically put it on site, and the job is to generate as much revenue out of this box as possible. The two best ways to put a battery to work today is to do what's called cost shifting, where you charge the battery in the morning with the sunshine, and you discharge it in the evening when rates are the highest. And so you can collect more money and then pass a bunch of that savings on to your consumer by cost shifting it from the morning to the evening. And then you can do another thing, which is a fairly sophisticated concept that the utilities have all embraced, and it's a thing called peak shaving. And this doesn't happen. It happens a little bit in some parts of the country for residents, for homeowners, but it's very common for commercial, which is you get charged a significant premium for the 15-minute window that is the most amount of energy that you consume in the month. So think about your energy consumption as moving along, and then all of a sudden you turned on a bunch of your equipment. It spiked up just for like this one afternoon when you had all of your machinery running, and it hit this tippy top, and it dropped down. 10 minutes later, it was just a weird coincidence that day. You will get charged an enormous premium for that peak, even if it was only a few minutes. Batteries can be very effective at clipping that peak. And as you flick on all your machinery, all of a sudden the battery kicks in concurrent and comes up and then clips that peak, discharging as aggressively as it needs to peak shave. And then when it drops back down, the battery just goes back to sort of general discharging. That peak shaving can be more valuable than all of the energy of the entire month. But that really gets into optimization strategies. Again, conceptually, you can sort of follow it and you're like, oh, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. You want to run that kind of optimization across thousands of customers. Every customer has a slightly different pattern. And you get extremely complicated. You essentially get it. You get an exponentially complex problem. It's at scale. It's NP complete. It's a very interesting set of problems. For your more technical guys, it's the knapsack problem with variable pebble sizes.
Well, it's another layer of savings, right? That you can explain to your tenants that not only are you going to get the benefit of the lower price per kilowatts, but you're also going to be able to do your peak shaving, which is going to actually save your overall energy bill on the other side as well. So really, that's absolutely really cool.
And so one of the things that King Energy talks about a lot, and it's very important to us, is the fundamental belief that sustainability progress happens when it makes economic sense. Right? We, as human beings, as individuals, we all want to help climate change. That is true, but we have businesses to run, and it's very hard if you're running a business to justify paying a significant premium for quote unquote green energy. So don't ask people to do that. If it's such a good deal, if it's so profitable, then just share some of that profit with everybody, and it'll make economic sense for everybody, and they'll all do it.
Yeah.
And that was core to our go-to-market strategy, was don't ask people to pay a premium for a thing that's hard to say yes to. So we come to our tenants and we say, hey, would you like to save some money on your energy bill? No strings attached. They say that's great. We go to our landlords, we say we'd like to rent your roof, no strings attached. They say that sounds great. We go to our finance partners and we say this is a pretty good return on a risk adjusted basis. They say, yeah, we agree with you. And then there's enough there for King Energy to run a pretty nice business and pay our employees fair wages, and allow them to take time off in the summers and be with their kids and do all the things that we like to do.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me, how's the uptake been? I know you've been live now for a while, right? So you kind of kicked it into gear more than a year ago now?
Yeah, we've our first system is over 3 years old. So our oldest system is about 3.5 years old. We've been scaling very nicely. We have over 200 buildings fully contracted and live or in some stage of construction, and growing rapidly. We've more than doubled every year since inception, and 2025 is looking pretty terrific.
Excellent. And what are the challenges? So where do you kind of run into the problems, right? Is it government? Is it the sales side of it, like convincing people just because of the complexity that this is all right to do? So I'm just curious, where do you get objections in the process?
Sure. So, we work very hard to make it simple. Our go-to-market strategy is keep it simple. So we tend not to get a ton of objections around complexity. We sometimes run into roof quality. You look at the roof and from you pop a drone up or you walk the roof and you're like, this roof looks like it's in great shape. But when you go to do an inspection, you'll find out that, the roof needs to be replaced, which is normal. Roofs get replaced pretty regularly on commercial buildings. But then you'll say, well, I can't build this rooftop with solar until you replace the roof and you put down a fresh layer of waterproofing and clean up a couple of these areas, and that'll sometimes cause delays. And they say, oh, okay, well, I'm not gonna we weren't planning to re-roof for 3 years. Call me in 3 years.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Gotcha.
Okay. And literally we go into Salesforce and say, call 123 Main Street in 3 years.
Gotcha.
We'll check back in with them. That's a very common obstacle that we run into. Another common obstacle, again, sort of, it starts to get a little technical, is we as consumers, we experience electricity essentially as a uniform product. We turn the lights on in our office, the light goes on. We turn the lights off at home, the lights go on. Right? It's always the same. It's incredibly reliable. When you start looking at energy down at the grid level, it's anything but. And the electric wires running down Main Street have a totally different loading than the wires running into a cul-de-sac in a suburban township. So you will often run into problems where you say, well, I want to install this system, an interconnect, which you're required to do to this local wire that's running right across this in front of this shopping center. And the utility will look at the wire and say, this wire is so maxed out, we cannot accept any new infrastructure on this load. And then we'll say, well, wait a second, we're not drawing power, we're putting power to the grid, if at all. And then they say, well, we're required by law to have infrastructure that allows that says, well, what if your system starts dumping power at its fullest capacity? Not only do we have to be able to absorb that, no questions asked, we have to be able to absorb significant headroom above that. This wire cannot take it, period. This is not a price issue. It's not a political issue. This is an engineering issue.
Yeah.
We will upgrade this wire. When are you going to upgrade the wire? Well, we're not planning to upgrade it, till the end of the decade. And then we say, well, what if we paid you to upgrade the wire, or we paid you to upgrade the interconnection, or paid you to upgrade the substation? And they're like, great, that's going to be $4 million. And it's still going to be 2 years. And then we will look at that and we're like, well, we can afford to make some contribution to that, but we can't afford to pay $4 million.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a dialogue with the utility, which for the most part tends to scuttle the deal. And so this is when people talk about, you often hear in the industry a notion called grid congestion. This is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And having that headroom and without criticizing the utilities, because the utilities can sometimes struggle with their public messaging and some of the ways that they approach their business problem. There's no question that there are very real engineering challenges underneath all of that, public policy issues that they have to deal with every day. And we're a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get into zoning and, the changing of zones you didn't have the infrastructure planned in the first place. I could just see that. I mean, that's a chaotic problem to go and address, right?
Well, you're hitting the other issues. So zoning, roof quality, interconnection, and then you're hitting another one called zoning issues, which is, am I allowed to build this kind of infrastructure in this part of town?
Yeah.
For the most part, so King Energy really only builds on rooftops and parking lots, which by their nature are zoned for commercial. You're not going to make a shopping center any uglier with solar panels, so no one really cares. That is just not true if you are looking to go out into a field and put a bunch of solar panels on a rolling hill, farmer's land. Even out in the desert where maybe, you're outside of Vegas, and if you didn't live in Vegas, you might think, oh, wow, this is this really ugly desert, land. Nobody uses it. It's worthless. That is not true to the local people that live there. The people that live there love that land, and they think very highly of it. And the idea of putting hundreds of acres of solar panels on areas that they've camped and, have gone ATVing and have ridden their motorcycles with their kids growing up. They're going to have a real negative reaction to that. And we can talk about the merits of that objection and whether that's a fair objection in lieu of climate change. But the people who live there definitely have a voice in that conversation. And on the subject of permitting, it can become pretty hotly contested. King Energy tends to stay away from those arguments because we don't do that kind of solar. But it's an interesting part of the business.
Yeah, you reminded me of the Bundys outside of Las Vegas, right? So, okay, so where do you see this going next? So what's next for King Energy? Is it because when we talked the other day, you mentioned that there's profitability challenges just because of where power costs the most, right? So it makes sense in certain areas. It doesn't make sense in others. So it sounds like, you've gotten a good start on the West Coast. You talked about looking at, Colorado potentially, but the cost factors are probably going to push you out into more of the urban areas where power just tends to be more expensive, and you can make the case for the savings a little bit easier. Is that where you see this going next? East Coast?
Yeah. So King Energy started in California, and the reason that we chose California as our beachhead market is because the electricity is very expensive in California. And at the time that we started, they had very favorable tariffs that allowed us and very favorable policies around building solar, and so it was terrific. And we grew and had a lot of success in the early years in California. NEM 3 really changed that. It really gutted California's solar, and companies like ours really struggle to make it work in California. And so since then, we've branched out into other states, and you have it exactly right. You really want to focus in on parts of the country where the cost of energy is very high, and there are favorable tariffs and favorable state and local regulations that encourage solar. So you're going to look at places like Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Illinois. Colorado is a good example. We are looking to expand into Colorado in 2025. They have some very favorable tariffs and policies in Colorado that make it an interesting place to do solar. Colorado energy is fairly inexpensive, so it makes it when you pass the savings on to the small business owner, the savings just isn't as much because their energy bill isn't as high. And so that makes it harder to square that circle. Yeah. But it's still a good business, and I live in Colorado, and so I like trying to help my community and help my state. So we'll get here.
Yeah, and then what about international markets? Do you think there's a play there as well? Just curious if that's on the roadmap.
Sure. There's extraordinary progress internationally in all over the globe in the rise of solar. I just read yesterday. I just read yesterday that Australia is planning to build the largest solar system in the world. It is the size of El Salvador.
Wow.
Right. And they are doing extraordinary work down there. Really, really admirable work down there. And then you look at Europe and Asia, it's exceptional. The rise of solar and batteries and wind and some of the innovation that they're doing. If you look down in Southeast Asia, they've done exceptional work around floating solar arrays, particularly floating on brackish water or inlets or areas that people can't live, but it's like 4 feet of water, and that is a fantastic place to build solar, and there's a ton of innovation going on there. Probably not necessary for King Energy to go internationally in the foreseeable future. The truth is that solar and energy in the United States is an enormous market. The United States spends $1.3 trillion a year on electricity, and that's growing rapidly. We have significantly underinvested in our infrastructure over the last 20 years. So the cost of energy is also rising very dramatically, almost across the entire United States. And so if I can't make a $1 billion business here, then I should probably rethink my business model.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it's a tough one. And I agree with you. There's so much going on out there. I was just thinking about it's another podcast I did with Steve Koo, who's doing charging stations for electric vehicles. And my wife and I were out in North Carolina a couple months ago for a wedding, and we, by mistake, rented an electric vehicle for our 3-hour drive to the wedding, and then discovered that there was absolutely no charging facilities in Greensboro or Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And it all kind of came to my head like, yeah, all this stuff is really good, but if you don't have the infrastructure to kind of support it all and to make it all work, then it's really a challenge. So it's nice to see that there's progress going on here, though, and that that this business model can actually work, and that because I think you're probably going to be able to start pushing change once you see how certain things develop and how this works in places like LA, to be able to go and change policy in other states that will allow this and make it easier to recover this energy, I think, you'll start to get some momentum.
Yeah. It is inside the industry. The solar industry is sometimes called the solar coaster because it's just up and down and up and down, and you think you're making progress, and then all of a sudden there's tariffs, and then the tariffs get relieved, and then you're back in business, and then all of a sudden they're going to sunset the ITC, and then they reboot the ITC, and then it's just, and then NEM 3 comes. It's endless. It is the solar coaster, and it can be exhausting, and it can be discouraging. And you're identifying, a very real problem, which is, hey, electric vehicles work pretty well when there's a lot of charging stations and you don't have to drive that far, but they really don't work. It's just not a great solution where people drive 100 miles without even thinking about it. And there's just not the infrastructure to make that work. And that's a very real problem today. However, the underlying fundamentals of the business and the underlying fundamentals are terrific.
Yeah.
Simple truth of the matter is that the cost of coal is only going up. The cost of oil and the cost of gasoline is only going up. And if you're trying to heat your home with petroleum products or carbon products or coal, what have you, it is less expensive if you install solar, significantly less expensive. And if you live in a part of the United States where you can own an EV, it is a cheaper way to get to work, period, full stop. And as you look out the road, you say, wow, do I think that gas is going to be cheaper or more expensive in 5 years or 10 years? Do I think that the cost of energy is going to be cheaper or more expensive in the next 5 to 10 years? Yes, there's probably going to be some bumps in that growth line, but the trend line is immutable. It's only going up and to the right, and it has been since 1970. Yeah. It is the retail price of energy has never gone down in the United States for more than 6 months regionally. It only ever goes up. So you say, should I build solar now? Should I wait? These are 20-year assets. The underlying fundamentals are there. It just pays.
Yeah.
And I would say this on that, there's a funny quality in the public discourse around solar where it's really fun to sort of beat on solar. Oh, the sun doesn't shine, and then on wind. Oh, the wind doesn't always blow. What happens when the wind doesn't blow? What happens when the sun doesn't shine? Like, that's a really sort of funny idea to chew on. Where if you're like, wow, if I was sitting in my house and I'm trying to watch a football game, and all of a sudden there was a cloud, is the TV going to turn off? Like, as sort of an amusing thing to play with at the bar with a beer in your hand, it's kind of a funny idea. As a practical matter, it's absurd, right? It's like, well, what would I do if a meteor, hit? Well, the truth is I'd probably die. Right. Like the reality is with renewables, it just makes really good economic sense. It just does. And whether you're a farmer looking to do agrivoltaics, you're a CNI, you're running an industrial business, or you're running a retail coffee shop, your cost of energy is going to be lower if you use solar to offset some of those costs.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, I think the efficiency's finally gotten there, right? So the math starts to work. I mean, it's even the same with the electric vehicles, just the efficiency of those motors just over the long run, even though, your battery's going to die at 200 and whatever miles, and you're going to be left on the side of the road potentially. If you're using it in a localized, a way, and you kind of take that problem out of the mix, right? It's really the good way to go. So, and I think it's only going to get better as we progress. And I only see, to your point, I only see energy costs of, going up, especially with, everything we're doing in data centers and AI and just sucking power like there's no tomorrow. And I just don't know that that's going to change anytime soon, right?
100% agree with you.
Yeah.
100%. So.
John, thanks very much for the conversation. It's been great catching up today, and I really look forward to watching the progress of King Energy. We got Colorado Climate Week coming up as well, so I might be out in Denver for that. So if you're in the neighborhood, I know you're all the way out in Durango, but if there's a chance for us to get together, I'd really enjoy that. So thanks again for the time.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the Colorado Climate Week. It's going to be really exciting.
All right. Thanks.